Good evening. My name is Nayaswami Devarshi, for those of you who don't know me, and we also have people watching online this evening. And the topic that was broadcast for people watching online was more about the inner life, which we will talk about. But the purpose of us coming together tonight and sharing is that this is the last night that the Ananda monks will be here in Pune as we are shifting to form a new monastery and really a new concept of monastery. We're shifting up to Khandala, about halfway between Pune and Mumbai. And I just want to talk about the reasons for this. Swami Kriyanandaji's vision of an Ananda monastery, which is very different from anything Ananda has ever done, but it is something that was very dear to him, that he talked a lot about the last years of his life. And so I'll talk about these things. What Swamiji wanted for a monastery, and part of the reason we're making this shift is because it's time, but also because I've seen 3 Ananda monasteries fail or dissolve in my lifetime for various reasons. The monks leaving, maybe either to get married or just leaving the spiritual path altogether. And so what Swamiji wanted was long-term sustainability. And this is what we're trying to finally do. And we have the opportunity to do this now. I think really for the first time since Swami Kriyanandaji has been talking about these things. And the monasteries that we have had, the Pune Ashram Monastery and other monasteries that Ananda has, it's offered amazing training for young men in so many ways. One of the great things that it has done, even though it hasn't worked as a monastery, is that it's trained future husband and devotees really, really, really well. And I think some of the wives can attest to that and say, yes, it's done that. And so I just want to say, we've really become very skilled at doing that. And I say that lightheartedly and in a positive way. And for some young men, their karma isn't to be monks for their whole lifetime. But Swamiji wanted a monastery where there would be lifelong renunciate monks. And so this is what we're aiming for. And we're using the model of what he wanted for a monastery. And it's very different from what people in India, I think, are used to, because the idea of monastery is not something that's very well known in India. We have Buddhist monasteries, but in Hinduism, it's more sole, single monks, babas, swamis, and not a group of monks meditating together, having a strong inner life together, serving together, having daily sadhana together. And, the idea generally is more of an ashram where people can go and hang out with the Baba or the Swami and have chai and converse and all these things, which is also good. But what Swamiji envisioned, he actually used the word hermitage very often when he talked about this monastery. And what he wanted was, especially the first few years that new monks came, was that there was a very strong training and a very strong support, especially for a deep inner life, before they took on too many of the responsibilities of organizational duties. It's very interesting that in around 1960, Swamiji wrote a booklet when he was describing and, in a sense, launching the guidelines and the lifestyle for the SRF YSS monastery. And he wrote that booklet in India in about 1960, which is notable. And the lifestyle he described is what we're aiming for. We're going in that direction. And again, it's very, very different than anything any of us here have ever seen, including myself. And so I'll describe some of those things. But I just want to read what Swamiji wrote about it. He said that this booklet that he wrote that described it, in 2006, he said, "This little book has retained a special importance in my eyes. I would like for it someday to be adopted for Ananda when the timing is right." And the timing has not been right until now. And we have a real opportunity now because we have 4 really bright, energetic, dedicated new monks that have come just in the last year. And so we also have some funding from our US monks supporting us in this shift. And it's just the timing finally seems right. And this is what we're doing. And we would like your blessings and prayers on this because this is something really new. It's also something that's for all of Ananda worldwide. I know for you all in Pune, what you see is, the monks are leaving. And so it's the monks leaving that's what you're seeing predominantly. But for what we're doing is going not just to a place, but to a new concept of a new type of monastery. Recently, I was at Ananda Village. I just came back this week. And when I described this to longtime Ananda members, many of them who were monks and nuns when they were younger at Ananda, and there was so much enthusiasm and joy upon hearing this because they all knew what Swamiji wanted for an Ananda monastery. I see this as something that's going to support Ananda worldwide, Ananda India, because really, in a sense, when you renounce your life and renounce family duties, you have a greater duty to serve all. And I see myself, I see the monks really as servants to everyone. And we will be having a lot of seva that we will be doing in addition to this inner life, which I will be talking about here. One of the opportunities also that makes the timing right is that Swamiji wanted his monks to be serving together every day. He didn't want them going and serving with different jobs in different parts of the organization at centers. He wanted the monks to live together, meditate together, serve together. He wanted the monks to have a business that they would do that would support them in being able to serve together every day. He wanted them to have meals in silence. He wanted them to have a very strong group sadhana every day. Many things like this. Again, all supporting a very strong inner life, which I'll also talk about how we all can apply it in our own lives, where we don't have to be a monk or a nun to be able to do this. So the seva that we're going to be doing, taking on, is really a project that's been going along a few years now, but it's the Ananda online classes, which is especially helping people to prepare for Kriya Yoga initiation who are not part of a center. And so this is going to be our main seva up there in Khandala. We have 2 row houses, bungalows up there that we'll be living in, 2 4-bedroom. 7 of us will be going. Brahmacharya Aditya will be staying here because he has these duties here as director of Ananda Pune. But Jamal, myself, Devendra, Vineet, Ramesh, Premdas, and Gaurav will all be going there, 7 of us, to start this really a brand new concept of an Ananda monastery. Now, some of the things that Swamiji said about this is that, especially as monks came onto the spiritual path, and this is for all of us, this is when we learn how to meditate, when we first learn Kriya Yoga, it's very helpful to make a strong effort to get these things established. And this is what Swamiji said: until a renunciate is centered in the thought of God, he should not attempt to shoulder the problems of the organization except as they come his way in the course of a regular day's work. This is not an argument for irresponsibility. It is a call to assume wholeheartedly our first responsibility, devotion to God. These are some of these notes that I'll be reading are in a letter that Swamiji wrote to the SRF monks when he was the head monk there. But very interestingly, he also re-released this letter and gave it as a Christmas gift to everybody at Ananda Village somewhere around in the 1990s. So what I'm reading is relevant not just for monks and nuns, it's relevant for all of us who are trying to get established in an inner life. Now, the other thing that Swamiji wanted monks in a monastery to be doing, and you'll see why, when I describe all these things, why we need a separate space to do this. One day he asked one of the monks here, when he was alive, he said, "How much are you meditating every day, or how many kriyas are you doing every day?" And then the monk responded, and it wasn't a high amount, and he was honest with Swamiji. And Swamiji said something very interesting. He said, "The one regret I have," I don't know if he used the word regret, because Swamiji never had regrets, but the one thing I feel bad about is that because I'm older now, my body just can't do what it used to. It can't meditate very much because of he had a heart condition and other things. He said, that's the one thing I wish, is that I could be an example for you younger monks. Because when I was a younger monk, I would meditate 5 hours a day. And that's what he held up as an ideal for monks, is to meditate 5 hours a day. And this isn't for everybody. You can't force someone to meditate for 5 hours a day and hold a stick over them. I stayed once at a Zen monastery, and it was one of these places where the guy walked around with a stick. And it was very interesting. It was actually a good discipline, and I appreciated the discipline of it and the focus of it. And if you started nodding out, or if you started fidgeting, he would come around with a stick, and he was very formal about it. He would march around holding the stick and march around the room in circles around the room. And if you nodded out or fidgeted, he would come behind you, hold the stick, and then whack, he'd hit you right on the back, really, really hard. And it resounded in the whole room. It was just this loud, like that. And because I was a guest, they wouldn't do it to me. But I really wanted to see what it was like. And so you could actually request, as he was walking behind you, you could just pronoun. And that was a signal to him that you wanted him to hit you. So I bowed down, and he was actually very skilled, because he would hit you right on this soft part of the shoulder blade. It would make a really loud noise, and it would smart a little bit, but it didn't really hurt. But somehow it was almost like the Shakti really got going, because boom, and it would really wake you up. I'm not going to do this with the young monks here. I just want to tell you that. Because Swamiji's way was joy. It was encouragement. It was enthusiasm. It was support. And so we're going to support the idea, the ability to meditate 5 hours a day. And it's not like this is an exact amount of time, because depth of meditation is way more important than the length of time. Intensity of meditation is way more important than the length of time. But all of this is to say that what we're doing is to try to support a very, very strong inner life that Swamiji wanted again for a monastery. I do see over the years this monastery growing and attracting a lot of monks. Swamiji once said to one of our monks, I think it might have been to Jamal, he said, "What could I do with 100 monks?" And it was a rhetorical question. And I think, presumably he meant 100 monks who were part of a monastery, who were part of a team, because that's also part of what a monastery is. It's a group of men working together, because when you work together like that, there's so much more power to it. It was very interesting, and this is a facet of this. When Swamiji worked or served and had a project in his life, he was amazingly focused and one-pointed on it. For about 7 years, I was on his staff. And at that time, for about 2 years, we would have lunch with him every day. And he'd be writing a book, and he would be so focused on that book that that's all he would focus on. And he would have meetings here and there, but they were just a distraction from his one focus. And if I had to bring a letter to him to get his feedback on how to respond to someone, I would have a time when I would go into his office, and he would turn away from his computer, and he would give me 100% full attention. He would take the letter, he would read it, he would concentrate so deeply. You could see he was absolutely, totally focused. When he finished the letter, he would think about it, he would look at me directly, tell me how he wanted me to respond to this person, and then he would very centeredly go back to what he was doing. And even when he came up for lunch, it was just, he needed his mind to get away from it. So rather than talking business, what project are you working on, and asking each one of us what our duties were and how they were going, it would just be light conversation, discussion. It would just be a way for him to mentally take a break, and then he would go back to that deep concentration. And this is what the monks are going to be able to do, but as a group, because we are going to focus on one main project, which is these online classes. And I predict that this will really take off in a really good way because of this group energy, this group focus, the ability to not be, I hate to call it a distraction, to get pulled into all the activities of a center, but it does hinder the focus and the power that we have to do one thing like that. And I believe that you'll see that having that focus together and concentration and the ability to be separate in our own sort of community will give a lot more power to the service that we do. So that's a big aspect of what we'll be doing. During the weekdays, that's going to be our focus, our dedication, is these online classes, inner life, daily sadhana, times of silence, classes and training in renunciation, renouncing the ego. On weekends, we'll be very active traveling. We'll be going to Mumbai Center, we'll be going to Pune, we'll be going to Ahmedabad, groups of monks going out. And that will also be a form of training of just how to do all of these things, how to be selfless, how to offer yourself in complete service to God and to the Guru. So this is going to be the lifestyle that, again, is very different than anything we've ever tried because of the inner focus and dedication and the intensity of it, but also the ability then to serve with inspiration, with this inner joy and energy that you get from having an inner life and a deep sadhana. I'll read some things that Swamiji said about this way of working together. First, I'll read one more thing that he said about meditation and just the importance of this, because when Master would praise Swamiji, it's very interesting because Swamiji was such a karma yogi as we see it. He was so active and so busy. He had this worldwide mission. And Master told him, you have a great work to do. And so that's how we see him more than anything, especially later in his life when we didn't see him meditating a lot. But in fact, when Master praised Swamiji for what he was doing, it was never for his work, quote, and his seva. It was always and only for his development of an inner relationship with God, for his devotion, for his inner life. And this is the power also that I hope that we can develop with having a monastery that has the ability to focus also on a deep inner life. And this is what Yoganandaji said about his disciple Rajasi, Janakananda. He was walking around the hermitage with somebody, and they walked by Rajashi, who was meditating deeply. That's the caveat. He was meditating very deeply. And Master said, be quiet, let's not disturb him. And Master said, you have no idea what great blessings are drawn to the work every time one of its followers goes as deep in meditation as Rajasi does. And this is what Swamiji wanted: deep inner life, dynamic outer seva. Now, some of the things that Swamiji said about this. And this was in this letter he wrote to the monks of SRF, but also to Ananda Village. When organizational responsibilities threatened to take his mind from the Divine Mother, Master never said, well, I will do this work first. It is more important. Later I shall think of God. No work is possible, he wrote, without the power to perform it, borrowed from thee. He would put everything aside to chant or meditate until his mind was firmly rooted in God. Man's power is limited, but God's is without limitation. And so this is the balance that Swamiji was wanting. It wasn't withdrawal from the world. It was intensity in meditation, depth of meditation, and then taking that God contact out and sharing it with others. Because that really, in a sense, is the real work that we all have to do. And it's not just monks and nuns, it's everyone here. I think all of us in this room at one time or another have had the experience of having a deep inspiration, having some God contact, and being able to touch someone else's life by just inspiring them, by encouraging them. And that's really the power to really help people, to change people. That's our real work, is to develop that inner life and to be able to give so much more to people because of that. Now, some of the other things Swamiji said about this: man's highest duty is to love God. All Dharma serves the highest end of developing one-pointed, single-hearted devotion to and love for God, the Supreme, and finally the only beloved. And along these lines he wrote, and again he wrote this to all of us, to people at Ananda Village, to monks. Ah, my brothers and sisters, would it not be wonderful if more of us were on fire with love for God? How many weep for the Divine Mother, as Master wept when he was a boy? Our greatest work in life should be to express that divine yearning, that love. When we can reflect it, we shall be able to work 10 times as hard and 100 times as effectively as we do when we draw only on our scanty powers. Let us think of God. Let us be drunk with his love. This is the first and the greatest thing that we can do to spread the work. Indeed, in the deeper sense, that alone is the work. And he was talking about the work of Ananda Sangha, of spreading Yogananda's teachings. So how do we do this? Because that's a high call for us. And Swamiji, in this letter, he gave a few suggestions, again, applicable to all of us. Number one, he said more silence and solitude. And he wrote that Master practiced this rule when he was seeking God. He adhered to it even after he had found the Beloved. He seldom permitted the devotees working around him to speak unnecessarily. Remain in the self, he would say. Think of the Divine Mother. Number two, better use of our free time. I think we're all guilty of poor use of our free time at times. Yoganandaji called these time wasters. And in one of his talks, he said, get away from the television. He said it's satanic, and get away from those televisions. And I think now he would probably say the internet. I'm guilty of this. I must confess that I need to get away from that internet at times and have more of an interior life. And then third one he mentioned, which is something that really, and I think is the most important, which is practice God's presence in activity. And about this he wrote, much of our daily life is spent in work or in other outward activities. Our minds may often become engrossed in what we are doing at the expense of the thought of God. We must somehow discipline ourselves to carry at least the feeling of His presence into everything that we do. And so this is simply what Yoganandaji called practicing the presence of God. I just told a story recently of a direct disciple of Master. He was with some of the young monks in Master's work, and he looked at the young monks and he said to them, looking at them directly, he said, most of you will find God more quickly through practicing the presence of God than through meditation. That's quite a statement. Now, I think maybe 10 years ago, I probably would have said, no, I don't really believe, I don't believe that. Not most of you, but because me, I don't know. I think it would be more through meditation. But in the last several years, and this was a few years ago, but about 4 or 5 years ago, I went through a period of about 3 years where it was extremely difficult for me to sit to meditate because of 2 different karmas that I was working on. And I could only sit for 5 to 10 minutes at a time, most of the time. I was lucky on a good day. And so, out of desperation, during this period, I was missing that God contact that I had in meditation. And it forced me to be creative and just spend most of the rest of my time during the day praying, calling to God, being in the divine presence with a lot more force, concentration, attunement than I had ever done in my life. And I have to say that in those few years of doing that, I think I made more progress and felt more depth of God communion through that than through meditation. And again, the two work together, because if it's just restless activity and outward activity and no meditation, it's very difficult to concentrate the mind and the heart, especially the feelings, in that way. But when you combine meditation with the effort, at least, to constantly practice the presence of God, I think you will find that no matter where God has put you in this life, raising a family, being in the corporate world, being married, all these things, each one of us can do that more than we are doing now. In fact, I would say that may be the most important thing that you can do, is to more and more constantly make the effort to tune in to the awareness of God contact in daily life. What happens when we do that is we start to get into this tune, into this flow of divine grace. And as Swamiji often said, he said, in the end, it's only divine grace that changes us. Our part is to work with the tools that have been given to us, meditation, devotion, practicing this divine presence. And when we do that, the way Swamiji described it, he described it as cooperating with grace. And so what we do then is that we enter into this flow of divine grace. And in the end, that divine grace is really, really what changes us. Because again, I can honestly say that I felt myself change more during that period when I was meditating less. A lot more, to be honest. Really lifelong things that needed to be changed in me were changed. And it wasn't through my efforts. It wasn't because I was determined that I was going to make this change in myself. Some of these changes to me were inexplicable. There were things that I didn't even know I needed to change. But suddenly, this inner transformation happened. And I cannot take any credit for it because I didn't work on it. It just, quote, happened. But it was divine grace that changed. And so this is our part, is simply to try to work more on having an inner life. Yes, we have to talk at times if we're with a family, and you can't tell your children we're in silence today and we're not talking, and it just is not the dharma that we have for each one of us. I can see parents nodding like, yeah, right, yeah, let's try that. But we can more and more, as we act, as we talk, try to feel the divine presence within us, flowing through us, the mind on God, the heart on God, and you will find more than anything else that this is what changes you. So as we all take this next step together, we could use your support and prayers for everyone here in this room, for everyone in India, because this is a big step. It's an important one that's not just for Ananda India, but I think it's a new model for all of Ananda worldwide, of a new type of monastery, which is really what Swamiji wanted. It's really, we're doing this because of Swamiji, for no other reason. We're tuning into what he wanted, trying to fulfill his vision of this, and we could use your prayers and support. So I think I'm going to actually call the monks up here who are all moving to the new monastery and just ask you to send us your blessings. Yeah, and I will say all of their names, since maybe I think some of you don't know them. Starting from this side, this is Gaurav. Gaurav is interesting because when I came to America, or to India in 2004 or 5, right when Ananda was starting, and then 2006 and 7 I came again, there was a 14-year-old Gaurav living and staying and hanging out with the monks, way, way back then. And finally, just in the last couple months, he finally decided actually to join us. And this is Brahmachari Vineet. This is Ramesh, who has just joined us in the last couple weeks from Mumbai. This is Jamal, who I think you all know, Brahmachari Devendra, and this is Premdas. So let's invite your prayers and your blessings, and I'll lead us in a prayer and ask for the Master's blessings, for your support and blessings for this new Ananda Monastery in Khandala. And we are actually moving tomorrow morning. Moving trucks come, and we will be there tomorrow. Divine Mother, Thou art omnipresent. Thou art in all of us. We invoke your blessings, your grace, your help on this new monastery, on all these monks, as we offer our lives ever more deeply to Thee. Om. 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 Thank you.